Welcome to this comprehensive tutorial on creating a 3D RPG game using Java. In this series, we'll cover everything from setting up our environment to building game mechanics, 3D models, and much more. Before we dive into coding, let's lay down the groundwork. We will need the Java Development Kit, JDK, and a game engine. For this tutorial, we will use the Lightweight Java Game Library, or LWJGL. First, go ahead and download the JDK from the official Oracle website. Also, download LWJGL from the official LWJGL website. Make sure to set up your development environment with your favorite IDE, like IntelliJ IDEA or Eclipse. Let's start by creating a new Java project. You can name it 3D RPG Game. Inside your project, create a folder named SRC, where we will store all our source code. Now, let's configure LWJGL. Extract the downloaded LWJGL files. You should see folders labeled Native, Jar, and others. Add these jar files to your project's build path. Let's create the main application class. Create a new Java class called Game. This class will be responsible for initializing our game window and starting the game loop. We'll also need to set up an OpenGL context for rendering graphics. To do this, we need to initialize GLFW, which is a library to create windows and context for OpenGL. Let's add the GLFW initialization code within our run method. Next, let's create our game loop. The game loop is where we will handle user input, update game logic, and render graphics. We'll use a simple while loop that runs until the window is closed. With our basic window opened and the game loop set up, let's clear the screen with a solid color. We will set the color to a light blue for the background. Now that our window is displaying a color, let's create some basic 3D geometry. We'll create a simple cube to represent our character or object in the game world. Here's how you can define a cube in OpenGL. Next, we need to define how to connect these vertices using indices. This is important for rendering our cube correctly. With our vertices and indices defined, let's create vertex buffer objects, VBO, and element buffer objects, EBO, to hold our data in GPU memory. Now we need to set up the vertex attributes to tell OpenGL how to interpret our vertex data. This is crucial for rendering our cube with proper color and perspective. At this stage, our cube is ready to be rendered. Let's add the draw call to render the cube inside our game loop. Now let's enhance our cube with some basic colors. We'll use a color shader program for rendering. First, we need to create a shader source code for the vertex and fragment shaders. You will need to compile and link these shaders to create a shader program. This program will handle how our cube is colored during rendering. Now we need to use the shader program before rendering our cube. Update your game loop as follows. Let's add some user input handling so we can move our cube around. We will use keyboard inputs to control the movement. With basic movement in place, let's implement a camera system. We'll create a camera class that will handle our view matrix and projection matrix. To implement the camera movement, we will modify the view matrix based on user input and the position of our cube. Don't forget to pass the updated view matrix to the shader as a uniform. With the camera in place, we can now better visualize our 3D world. In the next steps, we will implement the game world, the terrain, and character models. Let's create a basic terrain using procedural generation, which will add variety to our RPG world. We can generate height maps to represent the terrain. Now that we have a height map, we can create a mesh for our terrain based on the height values. Each vertex of the terrain will have a height value. Let's now modify our rendering function to display the terrain using the newly created mesh. To make our RPG world more immersive, let's add enemy AI. We will define a simple enemy class that will follow the player when they get too close. This enemy will need a basic animation mechanic. We could use a state machine to switch between idle and chase states based on the player's distance. As our game develops, we'll also want to implement an inventory system for our characters. This will store items that players can collect. Each item can have properties like name, type, and effects. We'll create an item class for this purpose. We also want to allow players to interact with objects in the world. For this, we can create a basic interaction system. Now that our fundamental mechanics are in place, let's shift our focus towards character customization and upgrades. We can implement a leveling up system. To visualize our changes, we need to ensure that the player's assets, like 3D models, can be loaded into our game. We'll use a simple OBJ loader to import models. With our structure in place, it's essential to implement sound and music in our RPG. We will utilize a sound library such as OpenAL. In the final stages, let's add a simple GUI to our RPG for displaying player stats, inventory, and quest details. We can use Java's built-in Swing library. Finally, remember to test your game thoroughly. Debug and ensure that all mechanics work as expected. Get feedback from players to refine your RPG further. Congratulations on completing this tutorial on creating a 3D RPG game in Java. You've acquired skills in graphics, input handling, game logic, and more. Don't forget to subscribe for more educational content.